Good morning, everyone, and welcome to an IMARC panel. This morning I have three guests. We're going to talk about opportunities and challenges. I'd like to introduce John Vann from Anglo American, Richard Holmes from Oz Minerals, and Phil Tornatora from De Grey. We've been charged with looking at opportunities and challenges, both in 2020 and through 2021. There's an obvious elephant in the room, that being COVID-19, that we can open up to the panel to start with. So what I'd like to do is start with COVID-19 and sort of talk about how you guys have adjusted, adapted from everything from a global major company through to WA. So let's start with you, John, and what's your thoughts on how you've adapted and where we're going in the short and longer term?
It's interesting. I mean, my role is that I look after geoscience and exploration discovery for a major, for Anglo American, and we're in 14 countries across the globe. So the complexity has been very different in different places. And a couple of years ago, we saw socio-political complexity rising in a number of places where we were working and started to build more adaptable plans about how we could manage our work, because a number of our projects were being stalled for lengthy periods because of social or community or environmental or governmental, archaeological. We could list a lot of things that were slowing things. So we had to start to adapt to that by having highly agile ways of doing planning, being much more planned about what we're doing. Now that might be very different if you were running one project or two projects, but with all of those projects, it kind of was that 20% of them weren't going forwards. So now we think that that could be a higher proportion. So we have to be much more agile. The other one is the obvious one is the safety component, safe workflows of how to actually interact. We cancelled a number of projects where we were interacting closely with Indigenous communities or very vulnerable communities, more because we were worried about them than we were worried about us. And we're also obviously worried about our own people. So there's that. And then the final thing I'd say is that it's changing the perception going forwards of where you might want to work over the next few years, I think. And I think, maybe that's a discussion for us to get into.
So what about you, Richard? Oz Minerals are in Brazil. That's obviously a challenging opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in Brazil, Peru, Sweden, and Australia, a little bit like John. I'm lucky that we run exploration mainly through joint ventures. So having in-country partners means that exploration can still progress, albeit at a much slower pace, and obviously the level of risk assessment and the level of procedures you put in place to keep everybody safe is much higher. The biggest impact for us is probably been in Australia, and a little bit like John also said, that we realized that it's probably our impact on traditional owners, which is one of the biggest risks. So again, we cancelled, a number of heritage surveys to just keep everybody safe. I think that was probably one of the most important factors. We realized that it's, COVID, the impact is pretty huge, but your impact on local communities can be quite significant.
And how about you, Phil? Your major project here in WA, that little bit easier?
Yeah, well, we've only got one large tenement holding in the Pilbara in Western Australia, so yeah, it's obviously much easier for us to manage. It hasn't had a great impact. Again, slowed down the heritage surveying side of it to some extent. The other thing is, it's made it a little bit harder to find people, drillers and geos from New Zealand and eastern states of Australia. So it's made it a bit more difficult finding people. But outside of that, and the unpleasantness of having a cotton bug stuck up your nose before you go to site every time, it hasn't impacted us much at all.
So one of the things that I've noticed is increasingly here in WA, we're a little bit more of a bubble from the rest of the world, and our challenges have very much become around people, rosters, obviously salaries are going up, house prices, things that I would have thought were unseen of. Rental markets booming. A strange place to be here in WA right now.
Yep, that's right.
The different challenges than someone operating a global exploration company, that's for sure. One of the other things I want to talk about is this is something that's been happening for a while, but increasingly we're noticing it. I call this the information ecology, which is basically how we make sense of what's going on. And I think what's happening in America is obviously affecting the whole world, and I don't mean the election. How do we know how to trust when we're all so remote from each other right now? Maybe I'll start with you, John, about how you manage a global business across many different cultures.
It's been very mixed thing, this COVID thing, because on one hand, you know, I'm an extrovert, so I get my energy by being in the room with people and being on site and being at the mine and being in the exploration site and being with people. And so if teams know each other prior to this, I think that glue becomes a really important investment when they can only talk to each other through screens. The danger is when people are coming in from outside and they have to now socialise into a group via screens. This is really difficult, and we're learning how to do that. Ultimately, I think if this persists for a long time, we're going to have to spend face-to-face time together and work out ways to do it. And we're starting to think about how to do that as a global business. On the more general informational side of things, again, one of the advantages of being with a big company is we have a security apparatus and an intelligence apparatus that operates for a range of reasons, because you're operating in Angola and you're operating in Colombia. You need to have these things. And so we have ways of curating the information through a set of expert filters to make sure that what's coming across my desk is reliable, or at least it's rated, so that if it's thought to be possibly unreliable, it's labelled that way. So I find that quite useful. And you know, the guy who runs all of our global security is a sort of ex-anti-terrorist global police expert. I mean, it's very nice to have those sort of capabilities. As for the US election, I've got no idea what's going on, Steve.
Maybe Richard, I could turn to you and sort of ask how you see this current moment with COVID as an opportunity rather than as a challenge or a threat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably an awful lot of geologists who've sat down, you know, over the past 6 months and done all those crazy projects that they wanted to do and never had time. You know, not being able to get in the field. Yeah, it's frustrating, absolutely, but it gives you time to think and reflect and, you know, revisit the crazy ideas, revisit all that old data that you've never used completely. And really gives you an opportunity to, you know, to push your thinking and your science forward. So I think I think there's been some fabulous opportunities come out of this.
And maybe that's a good segue to start talking about opportunities and success. So one of the things that has been recent is there's been a number of discoveries made, in particular here in WA. And one thing of note is, if I could be so bold, many of them are actually grassroots. And I want to know whether this is a trend or is it too early to call. But let's start with you, Phil. You've been successful.
Yeah, I suppose from my point of view, I think it's a bit early to say if it's a real trend. Yeah, I mean, there's been some great discoveries recently. I suppose they've been in different terrains and different styles of mineralisation and different commodities. For example, with chalice. So yeah, I think yeah, it's just sort of I don't think it's a particular trend. I think it's kind of more symptomatic of just the spiky nature of discovery, really. That it's all happened fairly recently, but yeah, a lot of them have been green fields and undercover. So it's good to see that companies and particularly juniors are willing to take the risk of drilling through cover and looking for blind deposits.
So obviously the majors can take those sort of risks, and we'll get to John in a minute, but the juniors obviously a bit more challenging going undercover. Oh.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I suppose with our project, we're exploring existing deposits and defining them and extending them, as well as drilling undercover. So Hemi's under about 30-40 metres of cover. So really, you've got to get the air core rigs out there to test that sort of terrain.
So I'd still be as bold to say that we're still not finding the really big deposits. No offense to the successful groups or even Wino, for example, or Nova. I hosted Roy Woodall recently, and he regaled us with stories of Western mining past. But one of the things I was interested in was to talk to him about what Western mining would have done to adapt to now. And I keep hearing a lot of companies want to find the next Olympic dam, but I actually don't see very few groups trying to do that. I see a lot of people telling us they're trying to do that. And I think there's a difference. So let's start with you, John. Anglo-American are under deep cover in the Mount Isa region, just to pick on an example. So tell us about whether you're trying to find something large, another Mount Isa.
Yes, is the answer to that, very, very strongly. But just to comment on something Phil said that's interesting, I'd like to think that there is a trend, and that the exact point that Phil made, that these discoveries are either being made undercover or in new terrains. I think the Julimar discovery is a new terrain from the point of view of that style of mineralisation. And, Anglo-American have picked up a large land holding along strike from that. It's all covered by thin laterites and soils and agricultural country. It's not very well prospected for base metal deposits. So those two things, Australia has been regarded as being very mature exploration play for a long time. Anglo, when I took over exploration, we were almost disengaged completely from Australia. We've come back in a fairly big way. And the reason is that I think that there is a lot to find here. But the deep thing is you have to find Mount Isas or Olympic dams, or you've got to really, or Broken Hills. You've got to be looking for genuine tier 1 targets if you're going through. In the case of Mount Isa, we're drilling through 900 to 1,000 metres of cover to hit the basement. Now, if you find a 300 million tonne 3% copper deposit like the Mount Isa copper deposit, you're in the money, right? There's no question of it. But most things you would find under 30 metres of cover that make money are going to be a complete waste of time. So it's a big bet. My boss, Tony O'Neill, says that the Mount Isa exploration is either the smartest thing I'll ever do or my great folly. It's one of, and he's right, because it's high risk. So it's the deepest exploration, I think, for a greenfields target in Australia since Olympic Dam. I don't think people have been drilling through half a kilometre of cover 200 kilometres from the nearest deposit. So it's bold, but it requires as well quite a lot of money. I mean, we've had 2 field seasons there doing geophysics and drilling that is about understanding the basement. We will be targeting based on that information. So I think the patience of my board will be different than the patience of a junior set of stakeholders and investors saying, well, I need 5 or 6 years to be able to turn something up here, and I need to be spending quite a lot of money each year. So I think it's that kind of deep cover is difficult for juniors. It's going to be, and it's even difficult for majors. I mean, that area of the Mount Isa Inlier has been known for a long time. The ground was all open. So that tells you something about and you can't have I've got a portfolio management tool for that I've got one of those, and I've got other things to balance the risk. So I've got things that are in new terrains that balance the risk, things that are in Angola or Ecuador that balance the risk in a different way. So it's hard. The deep exploration thing is hard, but there's no reason that the 80% of Australia that's covered by relatively deep cover shouldn't be endowed the same way as the 20% we've explored, which is fantastic. No reason at all.
So maybe that's a good segue for someone like yourself, Richard, into new technologies. One of the things that Oz Minerals have been very impressively committed to is data science and open innovation. This is obviously a deliberate strategy that you guys have taken forward. How do you see that playing out going forward?
I think it's absolutely key to new discoveries, and a lot of people tend to focus on the sort of the more sexy elements, the data science, the machine learning, artificial intelligence. I think the real way forward is more the open innovation. So collaboration within the industry. historically has been poor, without a doubt. We're all, every geologist is a data junkie, and it's their data. So getting people to actually share that data is so difficult. And hopefully, we took some bold steps with releasing all our Mount Woods data, and we're open and interested in sharing as much as we can. So I think moving forward, that collaboration aspect is what's really going to push exploration, in Australia and globally forward much faster than the old traditional ways.
So one of the things I sort of borrow from the petroleum industry is that they very much put a large amount of money on what they do with data, not on, they share data, but they don't share interpretation. And that's something I think we need to move forward with, and something I really pushed during Uncover was the sharing of data and putting more effort on the interpretation, more value on the interpretation of data rather than. Yeah. So maybe I could go around the panel, and we'll start with you, Phil, and just talk about what excites you about current technologies and maybe technologies going forward in the exploration space. What are you using? What are you interested in using?
I suppose some of the geochemical techniques that are being developed now would look very interesting. We're using the ultrafine soils technique. I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's been sort of further refined and developed by CSIRO, and it's now commercialised. So when we talk about undercover, if it's 2 or 3 metres of sand, it's still going to be blind to the old timers and prospectors. So there's still potential for using soils, much more quick, cheap technique of testing some of these areas. And we found that the ultrafine soils gives a much better background to noise ratio, background to signal ratio. Something else I think it's been developed, I don't think it's been commercialised yet, is that using XRF to with a widget to detect gold down to less than 10 ppm, so 10 ppb, sorry. So that can rapidly or increase the speed that you can do the exploration. You don't have to wait for the sample to come back from the lab. You can follow things up while you're in the field. So there's some of the things that I'm particularly interested in.
Maybe you turn to you, John, and I'll lead you a little bit with a question by suggesting there's more than just technology in terms of the future. There's the people element as well, and how we harness people with technology.
I think one of the mistakes with technology that I've seen over decades is that a new technology gets bolted onto the old workflow. And for me, the opportunity in technology is always, if I have a new way of doing something, how can that change the workflow? So to use the example that Richard gave, if we have data science tools available to us, one of the things we look for the kind of sexiest end of how to use those. One of the obvious things is that geologists have spent most of their jobs actually recording observations in our lifetime. We're all about the same vintage, right? So, logging things, looking at things, mapping things. The data science and the assisted AI stuff is going to be able to do all that stuff as well or better than we can. And although there are still cynics about that, I've seen examples of this already in our workflows where it's highly reliable. So the question then is, that liberates the brain space of geologists to be thinking. And at the end of the day, deposits are found in the conceptual step of saying, where should I look and how should I look and how do I interpret what I see, to go back to your point about interpretation. So I agree, it kind of liberates us from the data middle of that situation and more about how we frame the questions and how we understand the outputs. So I think that's a huge step. The other one on technology is that it amazes me constantly that the drilling technology we have now pretty much looks like it did 50 years ago. The changes are subtle. Why, when everything, in every other area of technology has got 10 or 100 times better and faster and cheaper, is drilling pretty much the same and pretty much the same cost in real terms? So if you could change the cost structure of drilling by 10, 20, 30 times, that would change the game for exploration, because you'd be able to go out and detect areas that you thought were interesting, and then essentially pattern drill them, right? It would change the game. We all know that most discoveries are not on hole one, right? So the more holes you can put in, the more you're stacking the cards in your favor. So one of the things I'm putting a fair bit of effort into is dealing with technology vendors who are talking about radical ways to innovate in the drill space, like Imdex and a number of others. I'm really, really keen on this. I think as an industry, we've got to get that thing working. Because once you find these things, if they're deep, it's going to cost you a fortune to drill them out as well. So you're changing the MPV of what you find just by putting it under 30 meters or 50 meters of cover. So how do we shift gears on that is very important for me.
So Richard, maybe I can come back to your point about open innovation. This is something I've believed very strongly myself, and I'm very impressed with how you've aligned with groups like Unearth and stuff. Is this something you would suggest that other companies maybe should be going down the route of considering how we share?
I would absolutely encourage it, and yeah, something I'm very passionate about. And look, it takes time for people to grasp. I've had, out of the Unearth challenge, I've had so many discussions with other companies about, what were the challenges for us internally. How long did the process take, and help lead them through, how to get essentially their executive management and their board comfortable with the concept of, look, we're going to release all our data to the internet. So it's been a really interesting journey, and yeah, we're taking small steps, not quick enough for my liking, but hopefully we'll get there. And I certainly think there'll be a few more initiatives coming out of us that hopefully will help push the industry in the right direction.
Certainly one of the things I really believe is that I believe in what I call the romance of exploration, that most of us got in this business for the thrill of the chase, more so than the money. And you have to motivate individuals. And one of the things I find motivating about open innovation is it allows all sorts of people to put their best ideas forward, irrespective of hierarchies and the like. So there's a real opportunity to get the best ideas on the table, which is not always the case, in my opinion. The other thing that's interested me, and maybe I could segue into talking about speed, is we live in a world where money's made from money these days, rather than finding things. And so we're all under more pressure to work in shorter timeframes. And we're working in a world where there's more red tape. And yet it's very clear that we need to speed up the discovery process. John's talked about going undercover. So things are getting longer just when we need to be shorter. So how can we speed up the exploration process, maybe the whole workflow? And I'm going to put this to all three of you. We'll start with you, Richard, because you're on the screen. We're talking about how we speed up discovery.
Yeah, great question. Change the workflow completely. I mean, I know exploration is is all about risk and reward. So take more risk. I think you got to ask yourself sometimes of whether we overcomplicate things. Do we simply seek more and more and more information to de-risk something that's already quite risky? So you're pushing your timelines out by trying to be sometimes maybe too clever. So yeah, I'd be looking at the risk element, changing the workflows, and just trying to dramatically shorten those timeframes. It's not an easy, there's no easy solutions there.
No silver bullet.
Absolutely not.
So what about you, Phil? What slows you down in the exploration process, and what do you think we can do about it?
Oh, I mean, you did mention red tape, and obviously that is a big issue. Red tape, green tape, and all of that. So being a junior, we don't have heritage departments and environmental departments. So mostly the geos that do that sort of thing. So I think we've probably got to just invest more time and more effort in the early stages just to get access to ground, because obviously you got to drill a lot of holes to find something, so you got to be able to get the rigs out in the ground. So that's obviously one thing that I think we can probably improve on, but it's not getting any easier, obviously, getting access to ground. you know, just a specific, more technical example at Hemi, for example, we'd recognise there pretty early on that the gold and had a very close correlation with arsenic, for example. So we went out and bought an XRF and zapped the samples as they were coming out of the rig. So we got a real time sort of indication of what we were hitting. So that enabled us to really speed up the drill targeting and drill less holes much quicker, without having to wait for the samples to come back from the lab. So it's pretty simple sort of thing, but it did make quite a big difference to the speed that we're getting through things.
But it does strike me that the answer for speeding up exploration can be quite simple. Turn to you, John. Is there anything that we can do strategically to speed up exploration, sort of, and how we think, in other words, how we do things?
I think Richard's comment about the risk framework that you work in is really important. And so one of the ways that we can speed things up is by spending less time on the things that don't turn into discoveries as well. So, I know, we're all driven by the idea of finding the next big thing, but also deep somewhere in the reptilian root of the brain of most geologists is, I do not want to walk away from something that somebody else comes along and finds. And that leads us to some bad decision making sometimes. You have to wear some residual risk and walk off so that you can spend your limited resources pushing faster on the things that can deliver. So that's one. I do think, in a technical sense, sometimes overcomplicate things. I agree with that sentiment. Sometimes we have a workflow that we follow slavishly rather than just saying, actually, there's a simple, quick drilling test for this. And part of that is kind of philosophy of science in a way, that we tend to think of the process as data collection rather than hypothesis refuting. So we've got an idea. How do I kill that idea as quickly as I can? If I drill here, here, and here and do these 5 things, I can demonstrate that the size of target I want is not there. That's a different way of thinking about it. It's kind of inverting it a bit, and it's useful and it speeds things up. On the other thing, I think on the red tape, green tape thing, I think there's a requirement to change our relationship with communities in some ways, that it's become too antagonistic and they're not seeing the benefits of what we can bring. So to do that with authenticity, we also have to walk the walk and make sure that we're behaving the right way and that we're doing the right things. And it takes a lifetime to get a good reputation, and 5 minutes for it to go wrong, as we saw recently in the Pilbara with those caves. It can go wrong really quickly. So we've got to, and we all pay a price for that. I mean, everybody's asked questions about it, whether it's your company or not. So I think our own joined up behaviour around doing things well with community environment is really important going forward.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up, guys. Thanks very much for talking about some of the challenges you've been facing and a little bit about where we can go in terms of technology and greenfields exploration and the like. So I know everybody's time's precious. If you're anything like me, I'm busier now than I've ever been with COVID around. That seems rather peculiar, but I know you guys have got precious time. So thanks for joining us at IMARC.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.